Welcome address by Mr. P.K. Taneja, who is the Director General of Gujarat Institute of Disaster Management. A retired bureaucrat, Mr. Taneja has served in various senior positions with Government of Gujarat and Government of India. So may I now request you to deliver your welcome address.
Respected Dr. P.K. Mishra, Principal Secretary to Honorable Prime Minister of India. Respected Mr. Kamal Kishore, Member Secretary, NDMA, India. Respected Dr. Aditya Jati, Deputy Minister, National Agency for Disaster Management, Indonesia. Esteemed panel members, esteemed delegates from G20 members, distinguished representatives of intergovernmental organizations, UN agencies, international organizations, and GIDM partners. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is indeed my great pleasure to welcome you all for this curtain raiser event under the theme Learning from Disasters, Memorializing Disasters, Learning, Building Back Better, Investing in Resilience. It is a highly encouraging development that under India's G20 presidency, a new working group dedicated to disaster risk reduction has been formed. Also, we all have a sense of pride that the group's inaugural meeting is taking place right here in Gandhinagar, starting from tomorrow. We all know disasters can have a devastating impact on our communities, economies, and environments. By analyzing and understanding the causes, consequences, and response to disasters, we can improve our preparedness, response, and recovery efforts, and ultimately reduce the risk and impact of future disasters. Further, disasters can also provide us with valuable lessons and opportunities to improve our strategies, policies, and practices for disaster risk reduction, response, and recovery. Today's discussion will provide us a platform for exchanging ideas, knowledge, and good practices on disaster risk management and post-disaster recovery and reconstruction. Our goal is to enhance our collective understanding of disaster risk management and build more resilient communities and societies. Over the next few days, we will have the opportunity to engage in insightful discussions, learn from each other's experiences, and explore new avenues for collaboration and innovation. We are indeed honored with the presence of Dr. P.K. Mishra, Principal Secretary to Honorable Prime Minister of India, who has played a very decisive role in the recovery efforts following the devastating 2001 earthquake and in formulating the policies both at the state level and at national level. In fact, the Gujarat Institute of Disaster Management, where we are right now, is also an outcome of the highly successful 2001 Gujarat Earthquake Recovery Program. I once again welcome all the esteemed delegates and thank all our partners for supporting us in organizing this program. I am sure you would also enjoy Kutchi folk art creative showcasing the emergence of Gujarat after devastating earthquake in 2001 this evening.
Recording in
I
progress.
wish you all a very productive and enjoyable experience here in Gujarat. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taneja, for your welcome address. Now request our chief guest for the day, Dr. P.K. Mishra, to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. P.K. Mishra is one of the senior-most bureaucrats in the country who has championed the cause of disaster risk reduction. He is recipient of the Sasakawa Award in 2019. Sir, with your permission, may I now request.
Good evening to all of you, distinguished G20 delegates, Director General of Gujarat Institute of Disaster Management, Mr. P.K. Taneja, colleagues from NDMA, NDRF, NIDM, GSDMA and GIDM, friends from civil society organizations, friends and colleagues. Participating in an event in Gujarat, and that too at GIDM, is like a homecoming to me. This is where India's journey of modern disaster risk management started, and I was privileged to be a part of it. In fact, after the 2001 earthquake, when the Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority was created, I had an opportunity to function as the CEO of that organization to oversee the reconstruction process. In fact, the GIDM was conceptualized those days, but when actually it started somewhere else, but when it actually started full-fledged in this building, I had again the opportunity to be first DG here of the GIDM. So it is a very nostalgic memory for me to be here. I can never forget the 26th January 2001, the day Gujarat shook. The shock was unexpected and the devastation was unprecedented. In fact, though Kutch is about 500 kilometers from here, it was felt even in Gandhinagar, and I distinctly remember for about 1.5 minutes or so how the earth was moving. In fact, when we were standing outside the house, 26 January, the car which was standing, that was also moving for many seconds, and it was a sight one can never forget. We lost much that day, the loss of large number of our brothers and sisters, and our precious children in particular was utterly shocking and distressing. However, Gujarat rose from the rubble, and it rose spectacularly fast and well. Within a few days from the earthquake, the Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority was established. The GSDMA was carefully conceived and given the mandate to drive the reconstruction and rehabilitation program and disaster risk reduction. Building back better as a phrase had still not come in vogue, yet the earthquake impacted areas were built back better in those days. And I remember those days we didn't have the experience of a large earthquake recovery program. We did learn many things from some of the experiences of Latur earthquake. Of course, the question was, why is it that Latur earthquake of 1993, Kobe earthquake which had occurred in 1995, and also some colleagues from USA and international organizations, and of course the civil society, all of them helped us in conceptualizing and preparing the roadmap and action plan, and also implementing the large-scale recovery program. retrofitting became a household term in Gujarat those days. Massive programs were undertaken for school safety, mason training, and awareness raising in general public, because those days it was felt that engineers and experts can prepare plans, they can prepare designs and so on, but masons are those who actually operationalize on the ground, and that was a very important thing, and that was taken in a big way, and many of the civil society organizations like SEEDS and others also who had some experience, I think those days, if I remember correctly, in Nepal, they also helped. Gujarat also began to address long-term risk reduction issue. The state enacted a new disaster management law, first in the country, which inspired not only our national law but also disaster management legislation in other countries. That was more than 1.5 decades ago, in 2003, and that time we could never visualize that it will be so impactful. In fact, when the COVID-19 pandemic took place 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, there was lot of uncertainty about whether one can take a unified and a convergent and concerted effort to address to some of the measures for COVID-19 for the country as a whole. It was realized that there was no legal provision, but ultimately we discovered that it was the National Disaster Management Act based on the Gujarat legislation which could help, and it has some provision those days, and one could never visualize those days that it will be so relevant, so useful and so timely at the time of the pandemic, which was possibly one in a century. The event this evening is an opportunity for reflection on what we have learned from the past disasters, where we have come and where we need to go. Memorializing disasters is not only a tribute to those who lost, but also a commitment to our future generations to make their lives secure. I am looking forward to hearing some of the experiences of Kobe, where citizens' engagement was at the heart of rebuilding lives after the 1995 earthquake. In fact, when I documented our experiences after the Gujarat 2001 earthquake in the form of a book, trying to document what happened during the first week, first month, and up to 3 years, how there was total chaos, how there was total fear and apprehension, and how a very comprehensive reconstruction program could be implemented. That time I discovered a book written by one firefighter from Kobe who had worked during the Kobe earthquake, and very graphically he had described his experiences, his fears, and his regrets that though he did much, but he couldn't do much more which should have been done. How he helped people who were affected by the earthquake in a very, very distressing situation. In Indonesia, after the 2004 tsunami, building back better entailed not just better physical construction, but also fostering a more just, equitable, and harmonious society. Again, I have some memories. After the tsunami, there was a conference in Jakarta to share experiences from other countries. I had the opportunity to participate. They wanted to know what was our experience of a recovery program based on the 2001 earthquake program. Italy has ensured that lessons from each earthquake disaster helps progressively improve their disaster risk management system. Again, I had some memories of those days. I think after the earthquake and 4 or 5 years within that, there was a sharing of experience of large-scale recovery efforts in Rome, and there are many other countries had come, and we had the opportunity to present the experience of Gujarat and India. On the eve of the first meeting of the G20 working group on the DRR, disaster risk reduction, it is entirely appropriate that GIDM, GSDMA, NDMA and SEEDS have curated this event and brought together inspiring examples from both North and South of what is possible when we pursue an all-of-society approach towards building back better. The G20 Working Group on Disaster Risk Reduction, which has been, the working group has been, as Mr. Taneja mentioned, formed for the first time, has identified mechanism for disaster response and build back better as one of the priorities. And I am sure all these reflections and other ideas in this program this evening will help us refining our policies, our approaches, and also the deliberations in the G20 working group meetings. And that is also a theme of this year's G20 event, One Earth, One Family and One Future. And we can work together with this theme, One Earth, One Family and One Future. And it is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra, for your address. It did instill our hope in human resilience. One of the two most deadly earthquakes to strike India in its recorded history was the Bhuj earthquake that shook the Indian province of Gujarat on the morning of January 26, 2001. The earthquake caused massive loss of life and injury, and very well elaborated by our chief guest today. We'll now move into our program this evening to remember this earthquake and to have a panel discussion around memorializing disasters and learning from them. The moderator for the session is Dr. Anshu Sharma, co-founder of SEEDS. I would now request him to please steer us through the performance and the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrinalini ji, and a very good evening, our chief guest, Dr. P.K. Mishra, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Let's move into this session by inviting Dr. Muralala Bhai Marwada from Kutch, who has traveled with his troop all the way to be with us this evening and to share with us insights from his experience of the earthquake and how they came out of it and how they memorialize the whole event. आपका स्टेज पे स्वागत है मुरलाला भाई. While they set up, let me tell you that this whole countryside, the dry desert area of Gujarat and Rajasthan, is a very arid and harsh environment to survive in. And one unique thing about this environment is that the culture and arts have evolved really slowly, but really profoundly in these areas. There is the Meghwal community to which Muralala Bhai belongs. It is said that they migrated about 300 years ago from Rajasthan to these parts of Gujarat and Kutch. and they bring with them generations of learning and practice of this music. Their music often has very deep insights. It's an unwritten, it's a spoken and sung heritage of learnings across generations, and there are very valuable nuggets of how they survive in this environment and what they have learned from it. And so when we asked Muralala Bhai how things were in his village in Kutch before the earthquake, what happened when the earthquake struck, how they survived it, how they pulled themselves out of that tragedy, and what Kutch looks like today, how things are in and around his village, his answer was as follows. Let's welcome Muralala Bhai and his team and hear from them the story of the earthquake in Kutch.
छाड़ाऊ में था गुजारी व्यापार सुनो थयो सुनो थयो छाड़ाऊ में था गुजारी व्यापार शिव समेत ने वारी जो कसते आया का आया कार में था कसते आया कार कछ बुझ रात में था कसते आया कार दीपा अंधार जड़ा सुना बुझ से उछलूटा दीपा अंधार जड़ा सुना बुझ से रमता कसते आया कार कसते आया कार में था कसते आया कार कछ बुझ रात में था भूख पयारा भारे विदेशी विचार चल वली के आवार विदेशी विदेशी विचार चल वली के आवार मिठा कसते आया कार आया भारी में था भूख बजार भारी कछ कुछ रात में था भूख बजार भारी जानो मोरो तवे कछ के गाने आल मन में था जानो मोरो तवे कछ के गाना बेटा कसते आया कार
आप 2 मिनट रुकिएगा, मैं मेहमानों से आपका परिचय कराऊंगा, बट फर्स्ट आई नीड टू गेट ओवर माय गूज बम्स. आई एम श्योर मेनी ऑफ यू मस्ट आल्सो बी फीलिंग द सेम. What a story of tragedy and triumph, and there's so much to learn, and this is a human way of memorializing, what we learn from disasters. Let me quickly introduce you with us on the ढोलक. एक मिनट इनको मैं परिचय करा रहा हूँ. एक मिनट स्टेज पर रुकिएगा. हमारे साथ ढोलक पर हैं रुस्तम भाई. रुस्तम भाई is The youngest member of the troupe, all of 19 years, playing the dholak for us. We have with us Damayanti Ben on the manjira. We have Sukhdev Bhai playing the janch, which looks a lot like the manjira but is a little larger, has a different ring to it and adds a lot of flavor to the music. We have with us Noor Muhammad Bhai, who was playing the Jodiya Pawa. Let me tell you a bit about the Jodiya Pawa. It's a joda, it's a couple. It's literally two flutes that he puts in his mouth and he plays them at the same time. They sound a bit like the bagpipe, but the bags are actually his lungs. So trust me, it's really difficult to play because he's playing it without a break, right? And that's how he does it. Abhar. This is a very unique instrument to these parts and these communities. And of course, we have Mura Lala Bhai, who's leading the troupe. The instrument he plays is the santar. The particular instrument he's holding in his hand is over 150 years old. It's been handed down generations in his family. He's truly in love with it. I heard that he's been to places where he's been offered money to sell this piece. He's been told that he can name the amount and it will be paid, and he's refused, saying that it is a part of his life. Let me also tell you, Damayanti Ben tells us that the day the earthquake struck, Muralala Bhai was not at home. He was somewhere outside. And of course, he rushed back home, and his first question was about his mother, is she well? And his second question was about his santar, is it all right? So that's the relationship of the artist with his instruments, with his music, and with his nature. Thank you so much. Tamaro khub khub aabhar. So we will now move ahead. For me, this was almost part of the panel discussion. This is a set of panelists sharing their experiences and their lessons. We'll now move into the second half of it, where we have a few invited key informants and guests who will share insights with us. While we set up the stage, let me also tell you briefly that we are live casting this event. We have a number of guests who have joined us online. A very warm welcome to all of you. We are from different parts of the world. This, of course, is a curtain raiser to a much larger set of deliberations that will happen here in Ahmedabad, Gandhinagar over the next 2 days under the working group on disaster risk reduction. It's a G20 initiative. We've heard it's for the first time ever that something has been done like this. We are very honored and proud that under the India presidency, this initiative is being taken, and by the end of this year, there should be tremendous inputs, insights to be shared, lessons to be learned from this. As we move into the discussion, let me start telling you about our panelists, and let me start inviting them. Joining us from Japan is a colleague, a lady, Miss Amy Nabetani, who is a volunteer interpreter and a storyteller at the Kobe Earthquake Museum.
Yes.
It's a very interesting profession, you know, where you go to these museums and there are docents, and in the Kobe Museum there are most of the people, elder people and younger ones, who take people around, take the visitors around, and many of the visitors are school students. There are people who are themselves from families that suffered in the 1995 great Hanshin Awaji earthquake. And the passion with which they tell the story and the touch they bring to that is completely phenomenal. Amy-san was actually in Tokyo when the earthquake struck, but her family was in Kobe. Her parents lost their house. Their house was completely destroyed in the earthquake. And thus, having had a direct hit in her family, she took the decision to be this volunteer interpreter who tells people about how hard the earthquake hit them despite being a very well-prepared community. And she shares this story with the newer generation, younger people, and tries to contribute in building a safer society. A very warm welcome to you, Amy-san. We are very pleased to have you here with us. Let me next move to architect Rajiv Katpalia. Architect Rajiv is a practicing architect here in Gujarat, and he has many projects, phenomenal projects to his credit, but he has also designed the Smriti Van memorial to the Kutch earthquake. We saw glimpses of that in the video, but we want to hear more about it. Some of the delegates will be visiting to take a first-hand look at this. It has a very unique character, it has a very soft character to it, and we'll hear about that. Rajiv ji, may I request you to please join us on the dais. I next invite Ms. Rita Missel. Rita is the Global Recovery Advisor at the United Nations Development Program. She's based in the United States of America, travels across the world. She was on a mission, and on our request, she has taken the time out to come to India and to be with us this evening. Thank you for that, Rita. May I request you to please join us on the dais. I next invite Dr. Agostino Goretti, who is a senior earthquake scientist. He's an engineer who works with the Seismic Safety Office of the Civil Protection Department in Italy, with 30 years of experience behind him, a number of earthquakes that he has seen, he has studied, he has worked on various initiatives, including on safer building codes around these, and we will hear his experiences on that. I next invite Dr. Raditya Jati, Deputy Minister, BNPB, the National Agency for Disaster Management, Indonesia. Dr. Jati has a wide experience in the academic world. He has researched environmental science and resilience, and he has also taught at various universities, including Gajamada, where he comes from. Welcome, sir. I invite Mr. Kamal Kishore, Member Secretary, National Disaster Management Authority of India. He's the co-chair of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure and also the chair. Conversations. Welcome, Kamal. Nice to have you here. And I finally request our chief guest of the evening, Dr. P.K. Mishra, to please join us on the dais, sir, and help us steer this discussion by chairing it for us. Dr. P.K. Mishra. Thank you. We are, at least I'm still recovering from what we heard and what we saw when Mura Lalabhai was and his team were, presenting on the stage. And the story was so closely knit with how we look back and we see the softness of the human side, the human face of this disaster. Rajiv ji, if I may first come to you. You have designed this beautiful memorial, the Smriti Van, which I think would literally translate into the forest of memories, a very soft way of memorializing this very harsh disaster. You must have got a brief that you translated into this beautiful landscape. We would really like to hear from you how you went about translating it and what insights you would like to share, what advice you would like to share with architects everywhere on how to memorialize local risk and do it in a very sensitive way. Rajiv ji.
Thank you, Anshuji. Actually, the brief that we got was very, very simple. We were asked to plant a tree for every victim who perished in the earthquake. And when you think of it, planting a tree is the simplest of things. You dig a hole, you plant a new sapling out there, and you give it a little bit of manure and water it for a while, and the thing will grow into a tree. That's normally how things happen. Except that when you think about a little more deeply about this is in Kutch, a place where there is not only the earthquake that happened, but also cyclones happen, droughts happen. Every 2 years, 3 years, there's a drought. Things don't grow too well out there. There is the monsoon comes once in a while, it doesn't come every year. So how do you plant a tree there? And so therefore, it became a challenge that do you just plant a tree or you think about a forest? Because that's the next thing you start thinking about when there are many trees. As we discovered, we were told that only neem trees grow out there. It'll be very difficult to plant anything. We did a little bit of research and we found there are 56 local species which are native to that place. And when you look at that, those are very resilient, hardy species which are there. The next thing was that if you started tracing every drop of water which falls on the land, where does it go? Because it does rain once in a while. And when you start tracing that, you start finding that you can actually capture that water. And this is something very interesting because if you look at climate, if you look at culture, and when you look at culture, you start thinking back in history, and you think of the Harappan civilization, you think of Dholavira. And for 1,000 years, that civilization survived on this kind of a climate by collecting water. The excavations that have been done, you see reservoirs of collecting water in very, very simple but effective ways. So it became a challenge that we will not borrow water, but we will collect whatever is there. So what we designed was a series of leaking reservoirs that can withstand earthquake forces because they're made out of loose rubble and stone put into gabion baskets. Not a very normal way of building, but they can take care of movement of the earth. And then the water that just flows gets collected and leaches into the soil. And then the root systems of whatever you plant downstream of that starts taking that up. So this was a very simple way of looking at heritage, culture, and thinking of how you could use these simple principles to plant the thing. Now, when we start talking about a forest, you also talk about resilience, you talk about rebirth, resurgence. So instead of commemorating only what has gone, it is celebrating life. It is saying that Kutch will be reborn, Gujarat will be reborn, and new things will happen out here, though we have suffered through a disaster. So I think the spirit that was set up by our Honorable Prime Minister of resilience and rebirth and resurgence are fully represented by a forest. A forest allows everything to coexist. It does not take out anybody out of it. That was one of the things that we learned from that. And lastly, I come to that, if you look at our epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, they talk about forests, 14 years of Banvas or lost in the forest for 14 years. And those, if you look at, you start finding out that that idea of the forest and collective of different types of different species, how they coexist, becomes a very strong focus of the way you start looking at resilience. With this in mind, this museum and the forest was planted there. Some of you will be going there shortly. You will see the forest growing. It's one of the largest Miyawaki forests in the country. And the museum that you will see looks at how disasters happen, how they can be managed, and how in the future we can face them if we follow scientific technology, we look at how to mitigate disasters in the future. So this is what I would suggest, that we look at the local culture and the climate as the basis of anything that we do for disasters.
Thank you for that. I think you've given very profound advice, but I also picked another nugget from what you were saying. It's the first time I've ever heard of anyone designing leaking reservoirs deliberately. So I think even the innovation in how you look at infrastructure which can service a particular contextual need better is really remarkable. Thank you so much for sharing that. With that, let me move to Dr. Aditya Jati. So we are talking museums, and it's not just the famed Aceh Tsunami Museum, but there's a lot you have done in Indonesia to memorialize disasters. There are parks, there are different kinds of memorials, there are many softer things that you've brought into the culture to keep the story alive. How do you do that? What is the thought behind, institutionalizing risk knowledge in the long run and doing it so sensitively so that it instills confidence and not fear about what happened?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a very honor for us from Indonesia sharing for this important moment in this time that disaster risk reduction is a part of the G20 agenda. And we're from Indonesia, learning from the past and aligning our efforts for sustainable resilience is very important for us. As a wake-up call at that time, 2004, the earthquake and tsunami in Aceh was hit, and Indian Ocean, more than 200,000 people as a casualties passed away. And at that time, it was a wake-up call for Indonesia, especially the government of Indonesia. And Indonesia is an archipelagic state. As an archipelagic state, we have more risk than any other countries. There is mainland. We have many coastal line. We have more than 70,000 islands there in Indonesia. Learning from Aceh, and then another wake-up call happened in Yogyakarta, 2006. More than 5,000 people passed away also with the earthquake. And in Palu, 2018, around 4,000 people also passed away. And also last year, it was the end of the year in Cianjur in Java, West Java, with a 7 second and 5.6 magnitude, 600 people passed away also. We are not short of lessons, but we are short of learning the lessons. So somehow something that we have to learn is bring the repeat again and again and again. When do we want to learn again? So the time is how we can get together and learning from Aceh. 3 things I would like to say here is first is about the governance. The governance is an agency that is with adequate authority, clear mandate, and sufficient financing. It's a wake-up call at that time. The law 2007 about the disaster management was established in Indonesia, and the disaster management authority was also established. So we need a continuously improvement and strengthening the governance. This is the first thing. The second thing is about the execution. It's not only how we learn from each disaster as a wake-up call, but delivering the result was a daily mantra, because it was only a result that created the impact for the people. So not just the ideas, it should be also the habits of the organization to create the impact when it's executed. The third is about the partnership. Rebuilding Aceh at that time was done by the government of Indonesia, not alone. There are more than 900 national and international organizations from all over 550 countries, from over 50 countries, delivering about 20,000 projects with around $7 billion from around the world going to Aceh and to rebuild back again after the devastating moment at this century, 2004. The aligning of the initiative and addressing the complex of system and fundamental issues to achieve the sustainable resilience. Why is sustainable resilience so important? The GBDRR 2022 last year held in Bali, 85 countries had joined us in Bali. The sustainable resilience is about strengthening climate and disaster resilience for sustainable developments, aligning all from upstream to downstream. Disaster management is the midstream, where we can also impacted by the climate change and also giving a result for the success of the sustainable developments. Therefore, it is important to align climate and disaster management initiative for sustainable development. It is also important for us to truly address the complex systemic and fundamental issues in order to achieve climate and disaster resilience for sustainable development. With the context that we need to is not only working among the DRR people or organization, but also we need to build the bridge and break the silo, engage in with more actors. Perhaps this forum might start to consider developing 2030 Sustainable Resilience Roadmap after the SDGs, after the Sendai Framework, after the COP21, aligning the important initiative in climate change adaptation, Sendai Framework and all, where together we can identify and address complex systemic and fundamental challenges that we will need to resolve in order to the world to achieve the sustainable resilience. Thank you, Samar.
Thank you, Dr. Jati. There were so many things that you've shared with us. Sustainable resilience is something that we must certainly talk a lot more about. It needs yet to be unraveled fully. But you spoke about the fact that in Indonesia you have been seeing so many major disasters so frequently. And this also reminds me that across disasters, many a times we see these lessons learned workshops and documents, and the same lessons often keep coming back, and sometimes you feel whether you are actually learning or are you not learning lessons and talking about those. But you've done a remarkable, Indonesia has done a remarkable job of this. You're showing the way to the world. And I guess a parallel happens in Italy, Dr. Gareti. You have seen a number of earthquakes in the last 30 odd years of your work. We would really love to hear from you on how your experience has been if you see them from one end to the other. Have lessons been learned? Have the efforts led to better outcomes in the more recent earthquakes that you have witnessed? And how has the public reacted? Is there resistance to the controls that you want to bring in through building safety codes, or is there a public demand for these?
Yes, yes. Italy faced a lot of earthquakes. Basically, every 5 years there is an earthquake that requires a national state of emergency, and everything that concerns the reconstruction and building back better. I have to say that Italy has a strong experience in building back better since the 1400, 1500. The Pope at that time sent engineers and architects to understand the damages and to provide anti-seismic provisions, not just to repair but to build better. So we continued on this tradition across time. And in recent times, I would say maybe we can start from the 1976 earthquake in Friuli, which destroyed a lot of masonry building. At that time, a lot of technical documents were delivered on how to repair and retrofit masonry building. You can imagine at that time it was really pioneering work, mainly mainstream and driven by research and academia, but later transposed to the technicians through these technical documents. And we continued over time. After 1997, Umbria Marche earthquake, where the St. Francis Basilica vault collapses. A lot of studies and activities, and again technical documentation was prepared for the repairing and the retrofitting or upgrading, I would say, of historical monuments. Not the full retrofit, because it's quite difficult to obtain on historical buildings, but since that time we realized that the repair is not enough, even for that type of buildings. And for historical buildings we continued on after 2009 L'Aquila earthquake. The earthquake hit the capital of the Abruzzi region, which was an historical town, and with a lot of monuments under protection of Ministry of Cultural Heritage. And even at that time we prepared some guidelines for the assessment and retrofitting of historical buildings. For what concerns the building codes, the change of paradigm in Italy, it was the 2002 earthquake when a school collapsed and 27 kids remain under the debris. It's not the same number that we heard from previous speakers, but I can tell you that this event really posed the question of seismic safety to the attention of the citizens and to the politicians. Immediately they realized that there have been 20 years of stagnation on seismic zonation and on seismic code. And this push to have a completely newly drafted building codes, which includes not just the new buildings, but also the existing buildings, the bridges, and all other types of infrastructures. This produced a lot of difficulties at the beginning and efforts to address this new code in the technical community mainly. Answering to this question, I would say yes, we learn from earthquake, we increase our knowledge, and we try to transpose into the building codes and to the seismic zonation, which are the tools that, let's say, engineers have to build resistant and resilient structure. If this comes from a demand of safety of the citizens, on this I would say, in general, no. and I'm a little bit afraid about this, because citizens raised their awareness just after the earthquakes. So after the collapse of the school, there was a large raising awareness, especially the mothers. The mothers in the surrounding municipality, surrounding the one where the school collapsed, chained themselves, saying, if my kids will die under the breeze of this school, I want to die with them. So imagine the power of this message for the politicians that immediately realize that they're under protection of all the school system, and even the President of the Italian Republic has to intervene in order to try to find some solution for this. The same occurred after the 2016 Central Italy earthquake, the one that completely destroyed Amatrice. Probably you heard and you've seen on TV the really devastating images. At that time, the earthquake hit 4 Italian regions, the whole Central Italy, and immediately all the parents were really scared to send the kids to schools, even if they had been checked for safety, with safety assessment after the earthquake. But they were really scared, and immediately civic groups started to be, let's say, established in each municipality, requesting safety for the schools. So in that moment, there was really an high demand of safety, but immediately after the earthquakes, this decreased, and I have to say that it is a demand of safety, but it's not linked to the building codes or to the seismic zonation. The normal citizens do not link these two things together, so the updating of the seismic codes still remain a domain which is limited to a small group of experts, of technicians, of academics, and it's difficult then to reach the politicians, which are much more driven by the demands of the citizens, so changes are not so easy to be implemented. So this is a little bit the experience of Italy. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much for that. I think thank you. There's two very important things you touched. I think firstly, it was a very honest and a very clear statement that you made, which resonates with all of us. In the disasters that we've seen, the public demand is very high right after a very high impact disaster like an earthquake, and then it tapers off. And very often we may say that public memory is short, but the fact also is that while we are looking at earthquakes as one consolidated single piece, people who are living in these conditions are dealing with various disasters, and their short-term day-to-day life is also filled with so many things that survival often takes precedence, which we don't see from our scientific lens. Even Kutch, where the artists who just sang for us come from, there was an earthquake that happened in the middle of a drought, and they went back to conditions which are so harsh even otherwise that ensuring sustenance for their families for the next month is actually probably more important for them than the next earthquake, which they don't know when it will come. But that's a huge challenge. It is true for all of us. The other thing that you brought in is very interesting around historical buildings, and there are various initiatives. There's efforts also that the NDMA is making around protecting, heritage. But I think what you brought in was also the need to learn from historical buildings. There was something that was being done right, 500, 800 years ago, and that's true for India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, and Mexico. So across the world, you find these good practices which were being practiced even without scientific advancements of the way nature that we look at now. So there's a dual dimension to it. I hope someday we should be able to connect these dots and learn across what principles made this happen. I think where this takes us is the perceived need that we see for the people and people themselves seeing, both in terms of immediately after a disaster and then in what we may call normal peace times. Rita, you do a lot of things, amongst which your post-disaster needs assessment experience is phenomenal. You've done a number of PDNA exercises globally. UNDP is a co-creator and lead in this whole, domain. I have a very simple question for you. Does a better assessment of needs lead to better outcomes after a disaster? how have you seen this unfold in your experience?
Thank you, Anshu, and thank you also. It's an honor and privilege to be sitting on this dais with so many eminent people with so much experience, rich experience to bring. The question you have posed is not an easy one to answer, although it's a very simple question, as you mentioned. A good assessment, is foundational in planning a good recovery process. It's not necessarily a guarantee to good recovery outcomes. I wouldn't say that. But this is the first and the very critical step to planning recovery processes, which gives us the scope, the kind of people that should be assisted to recovery. It gives us the financial estimates that's required. It tells us who could be the people on the ground who could take forward the recovery processes. Once these principles and the framework in a good assessment is outlined, I think it makes it much easier. It's just like any other planning process, except that here we are dealing with a very condensed time frame for reconstructing completely or going back to what we would call normal life. I think one good practice in the assessments lately, some of the things that I've seen is that there's a demand to just focus on recreating infrastructure only, focus on damage assessments, not talk about lives and livelihoods of people. But as you can see, when you talk about recovery of Kutch, or you have talked about the recovery of Indonesia, recovery experience in Italy, you could see it actually takes a long time. It's sometimes generational. And so you cannot do anything so quick and dirty for us to be able to long plan for this kind of regeneration of what he was talking about, like what you're doing right now. It's a regeneration. And I remember reading something about from Sarah, which talks about 4 phases in recovery. One starts with relief, but actually ultimately you're supposed to lead to that stage of regeneration, where people's lives and livelihoods of communities are completely changed over because of the disaster, but for the better. So I think that's one point to keep. While, assessments can be improved, and particularly now so because the environmental impacts of disasters are becoming increasingly, difficult to compute or estimate, but still they are very critical for us to understand. And so I think the complexity of doing assessment should not be undermined. At the same time, I think what it requires is the investment of capacities, that's all. Local capacities, academic institution, local people who know the subject matter well. So this whole notion of assessment can take 3 months and then everything is going to be so much delayed is completely a wrong notion, as if countries like Indonesia and India, which have invested, legislated that there should be a proper post-disaster needs assessment to inform recovery processes happens, then I think that would be a very, very good start to recovery process. Finally, I would think, I'm just coming back, you mentioned about a mission that I undertook. I was in Syria after the earthquake to do an assessment there. The situation there is so complex. The country has been going through almost a decade or more of conflict. Aged infrastructure, a brain drain in the country, no skills, they don't have doctors in hospitals who will do specialized surgery for 15 or 17,000 people who have, injuries, sustained long-term injuries, physical rehabilitation in a long time. Irrigation canals which were there for thousands of years have been damaged. Aleppo is a city which is, more than 2,000 years ago old with, heritage buildings completely decimated now because over the years it has not been maintained. So this whole concept of using an assessment even to start with an inventory of what assets we have, they did not have that. The assessment was a starting point for the Ministry of Antiquities in Syria to actually think through, okay, this is where we have this, including heritage homes, right? So this building of inventory of capacities and assets is very, very important for countries to go forward in trying good recovery. And then, 1, 2 things that I would also like to bring out from the Syria experience. Sometime back, maybe 7 or 10 years back, they had a Ministry of Disaster Management. Over the years, because of the current, focus on the conflict, this ministry was slowly, give way to, lack of capacities, no attention, and ultimately dissolved. And it did not subsequently exist. When the earthquake happened, they had to start from scratch with relief committees. So the important point is in countries where you need to, you have a hazard profile like in Syria with droughts continuously all the time, and then you have earthquakes coming in of this nature. Having an institution with, existing capacity is very critical. And without that capacity, if you start from the time of the recovery, it's going to take a very long time for an institution to build up. So for that extent, maybe Indonesia, in India itself with GSDMA and OSDMA type of institutions has set a very good example which should be followed through. And finally, of course, the whole who's going to foot the bill, you know. When Syria earthquake and Turkey earthquake happened, there was a donor conference, and about the Turkey bill was about 100 billion for recovery and reconstruction, and the donor conference only generated about 6 billion of that, you know. And then there is, it's a Syria which, you know, is already through sanctions, has no resources available, 14.6 billion in needs, and out of that only 1 billion was, you know, this is going to be the case. The humanitarian response plan in Syria also just about had 7%. What is the way in which institutions or governments are dealing with the issue of financing? Why is it supposed to be an afterthought? Why not planned as a separate budget line within your own development budget to manage such large-scale crisis, which obviously is something that we all know is going to escalate and accelerate with climate change, you know? So financing, institution, getting good capacities, partnership with local institutions is very, very important when we are planning good assessments, and these can guarantee a good outcome along with a good assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. We must find we must find more time to hear more about Syria from you. I'm sure there's a lot that you would have to share. But one very quick follow-up thing. So you mentioned about the gap, and then also we read so many studies that tell us that about 80% of reconstruction after disasters mostly happen privately. That's without any assistance. So there's already a, you know, there are people filling that gap. Now, when you talk about building local capacities for assessments, and I know you constantly are revisiting and improving the methodologies of the assessment themselves, do you think there will be a time, sometime soon in the future, when communities, affected communities and families may themselves contribute to this assessment, do some kind of self-assessments and be partners in the assessment process also?
So if we are given the time and space, I think recent example was in Pakistan, we actually went through a round of consultations with communities during the assessment process to prioritize recovery needs and come out with what would their vision of recovery should be like, you know. And so the priorities were, of course, the most of the social issues, the social services, restoration. It's about girls going back to school. It's about having their own homes. I think there's a long history and tradition even in India of people taking over the reconstruction of their own homes, their lands and the settlements, you know. So encouraging that form of ownership, whether at the individual level or the community level, allowing people to take pride in their efforts, whether it's their own heritage, you know, when they are participating in the recovery process is something that is very critical. I think this notion of trying to, of a larger institution trying to do things by itself, I think is not successful. You just mentioned about having 550 partners after the Aceh tsunami to do work together. So it's a combined effort of the government. Government provides the framework for action, but it is partners, the communities, private institutions who actually implement recovery.
Thank you so much, Rita. We certainly have to hear more from you at some good time. I'll move next to Amy. Amy-san, we see you on the screen. Thank you once again for joining. We know what you do. You are a volunteer interpreter at the Kobe Earthquake Museum. We know you had a personal experience in your family with this earthquake and took up this challenge. Tell us what was going on in your mind. What did you feel? What made you get into this volunteering that you've done for a considerable amount of time? And what do you feel now when you meet these people who come to the museum and you talk to them? What drives you? Amy-san?
Okay. It is a big honor for me to be here and represent the people of Kobe. I hope my presentation will help you understand what my experience was like during the Kobe earthquake museum from day 1 until day 4, and my thoughts and now and 28 years later. This is the point of view as an ordinary citizen. And I work full-time at a public employment office, and I do volunteer work at the Kobe Earthquake Museum on weekends to guide the people through the exhibits. I'd like to tell you why I do volunteer work at the museum. When the earthquake occurred, my parents and brother were living in Kobe, and I was living in Tokyo. The earthquake came out of the blue. My My family were living was built in 1929, so it was quite old when the earthquake hit. It was located in an area that suffered severe damage. I was extremely worried whether my family were alive or not. And because of this, I decided that I needed to do something. I did not want to just sit and watching the non-stop news reports showing the disaster over and over again. So the first thing I did was go out and buy essential items taken to Kobe to help my family. On day 2, I drove to Kobe with my baby girl. She was only 18 months old, so I took lots of diapers for her and anyone else with a baby who might need. I had no idea how long we'd be there for. On day 3, I got a call from my brother telling me they're alive. I was so relieved. Driving toward Kobe from Osaka, I saw the city had been destroyed much more than I could ever have imagined. I lost my words and cried. As I entered the disaster zone, it suddenly became very real for me. I thought I was prepared to face it, but I wasn't. On day 4, I found that my friend's father, who lived just in front of our house, had been killed. The second floor had collapsed on him while he was sleeping. Also, a teacher from my high school days who lived nearby was crushed to death. Many people died this way. More than 80% of the casualties were crushed to death. I ended up staying in Kobe for 3 months so as to support my family. After a few years, our city was restored. Nowadays, when you walk on the street, it's very difficult to see any sign how terrible the earthquake was. But for me, it's always remind the tragedy. It's the newly built areas. I still have the vision of the houses that were there before, in which many people were trapped underneath the debris and the fires came, burning them alive. 28 have passed by. Even now, there are people who suffer from the earthquake in different ways. I've met them through my work. They are still stuck with the pain of want you to learn from the disaster. We had a reasonable level of confidence that we wouldn't have earthquake in Kobe, and that other cities should worry about it, not for us. We haven't prepared for earthquake at all, and we were not educated about them. We cannot prevent the natural disaster from happening, but we can reduce the destruction caused by them. We received the lesson the hard way. Since then, we have revised the building law to prevent crash injury or death. Government funds have been allocated to improve the soil conditions and the structure where houses are built. We've also educated people in how they should prepare and protect themselves. If every one of us can learn how to prepare for the disaster, the human and material losses will be diminished. This is a major reason for the existence of our Earthquake Museum. Why the young generation learning about the earthquake from history book? It's still important for us who lived through the earthquake to pass on our experience to them. This is why I volunteer at the Earthquake Museum. Thank you for listening.
"28 long years have passed, and in some ways it still feels like yesterday." Thank you for sharing your experience with us, Amy. Most of us cannot fully comprehend what you go through, but we understand where you come from. We truly appreciate what you do. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for being who you are. You give us a lot of hope. It's been an amazing hour, Kamal. We've heard so many philosophical, emotional, strategic, operational inputs. You have the unenviable job of taking all of this to the G20 Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group, the deliberations you will hold there. Tell us a bit about the working group and how you plan to drive it.
First of all, I disagree with you that it's unenviable. It's an enviable job. I've got great friends and colleagues I'll be working with. I am quite excited about it, that we have this opportunity to drive the disaster risk reduction agenda globally through the G20 platform. When it comes to Build Back Better, it's one of the 5 priorities of the group as we set out when we set this up. And I will not yet speak on behalf of the group because we haven't met and we haven't deliberated on it. But there are 3 things that I think we should pursue with seriousness and explore what is possible in that. The first thing is about planning for recovery. Colleagues, some of them here in the room, Rita, have been talking about, we have disaster response plans, we have disaster risk reduction plans. What about disaster recovery plans? How do we recover from a major event? On that, the discussion is not new, but we haven't really found traction. Because I think when you begin to talk about recovery plans, you have to think about it much more broadly. You have to go out of your comfort zone and engage with different development sectors. Because sometimes a recovery is an opportunity also to revitalize an economy. If you look at the kind of numbers we are talking about for Turkey, that would come to something like $10,000 per person. That's a lot of money. If you spend it well, if it is planned well, you should be able to revitalize the economy and really rise back from the ashes. So how do we look at recovery planning for different scenarios before a disaster? What is how can we develop a global practice on it? So that's one thing. The second is, again, Rita said, who will foot the bill? Of course, it's a complex thing, but I just wonder why we do not have a global mechanism like we have SURF, the Central Emergency Relief Fund, a similar fund for recovery. It could be smaller fund, not smaller than SURF, but it can't cover all the recovery needs, but at least catalytic money available to kickstart recovery processes, kickstart at least technical assistance. Time after time, there's a major disaster, we do assessments. A few months after the assessments, we do the donor conference. Donor conferences come up with pledges. Pledges do not materialize 100%. If they materialize about 60%, you're lucky. It's the same pattern over and over. I have seen it for the last 25 years. So we have to have a more robust, predictable, global mechanism of providing catalytic financial support to recovery. It doesn't have to be just by government pulling in. It could be private sector. It could be crowdsourcing. There could be multiple different ways. We have to be imaginative about it. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that we talk about big earthquakes, and today's discussion has been heavily biased towards earthquakes. But what about small and medium scale disasters that happen every season, that wash off a bridge, that wash off a road, and we don't have a way to rebuild it quickly? I think the kind of regime we are going to enter into in terms of impacts related to climate will be recovering all the time. We'll be always recovering. There will be a recovery program in the country going on all the time. So how do we pay attention to small and medium scale disasters? Small and medium scale disasters tell you a story of accumulation of risk. In a sense, small and medium scale disasters are an early warning of big things to come. So we must not ignore them. I think the cumulative impact, there are studies after studies that have shown the cumulative impact of small and medium scale disasters in some geographies, not everywhere, far outweigh the more spectacular disasters. So these are the 3 things: plan, finance and get better at managing small and medium scale disaster recovery as well.
Thank you for that. I think, yes. Thank you for that. So it's really interesting how you speak about a very scary future where we'll be recovering all the time, but you also speak of catalyzing in the financial domain, but that playing a catalytic role will be probably very critical across the board. We have to switch from being providers to being catalysts for everything that we will want to trigger globally on this. Thank you for the clarity you bring, Kamal. We are all really happy that the working group is in very good hands. Thank you for that. We had invited questions in advance to be efficient. We had a number of inputs that we got. We will have time on this dais only to take a couple of these questions, but we know there are others, and to you I would only request that after this event, in a few minutes all the panelists will be in the galleries behind this hall. We will be in the exhibition area. Please do come up and speak to the panelists. Our apologies, we won't be able to take all the questions, but we'll take a couple for sure. We have a question from Ms. Meher, who comes from CEPT, from the Center for Environmental Planning and Technology. Meher, can you please go ahead and ask your question?
Hello. Yeah, it was a very insightful session for sure. My question is for Mr. Kamal Kishore, and it is basically, do we envision that G20 initiative, which outlines objectives for the years 2030, 2047 and 2070, will also take into account the climate crisis projections that extend as far as 2100, as expected lifespan of many of us?
Okay, let's take the second question also. We have another question from Dr. Sri Jayanti from ISR, the Institute of Seismological Research. Dr. Jayanti.
Good evening, everyone. My question is to Dr. Agostino Garetti. Sir, being a seismologist, we believe that earthquakes don't kill, but buildings do. So earthquake safety comes from safety buildings. So the existing or the prevailing codes for safe buildings are very technical. How do we simplify them for the policy makers or to the house owners? How do we simplify them? And can you suggest some tips how we can communicate seismic risks and any solutions how to deal with this?
So we are running a bit over time. Let's take these two to start with. Kamal, 2100.
So the point of how the climate changes are being projected and also being observed and how that affects our work here, I think it's a really good question. So for a number of things, for example, the first priority of the G20 working group is to look at early warning systems. And the region by region analysis that we are doing about what is the kind of hydrometeorological disasters we should be preparing for. We've done that for Asia Pacific. Our colleagues from UNSCAP have put together a very solid analysis of that. That takes into account not just the risk of hydromet hazards now, but also into the future. But frankly speaking, it's very difficult to look at what a particular location will face in 2100. You know, global averages one can anticipate, but local level manifestations are difficult to predict. So it has to be by definition an iterative approach, and that is going to be one key area of how we will look at bolstering early warning systems within the context of changing disaster patterns related to hydrometeorological events. There is another priority which links disaster risk reduction with ecosystem-based approaches. Just last month, our own government announced a major national initiative on mangroves mission, protecting mangroves, rejuvenating mangroves. How can we pursue the implementation of such initiatives in a manner that they also make us resilient from disasters. So that's just an example, but that's something we will definitely want to pursue. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Yes, definitely most of the casualties in case of earthquakes are related to the physical damage of the built environment. Not 100%, but obviously most of them, the large part. So this is the reason why we have to build safe structures, safe buildings, safe infrastructure. And one way to have this safe building is to use modern seismic codes, modern seismic hazard map, modern seismic zonation, modern seismic soil amplification studies, liquefaction studies. There are a lot of technical studies today that have to be performed and implemented in order to obtain safety structures. So, and the building codes, the modern building codes are becoming more and more complicated all over the world. This is, I mean, a fact. So simplification, when we were talking about simplification, it's not clear to me if you were talking about simplifying the message or identifying the key messages for the citizens, or simplify the code for the self-construction buildings that in some part of the world can arise. If it is the first question, it is, we have in Italy some experience, for example, to link incentives, fiscal incentives for seismic retrofitting to seismic classification, and the seismic classification is based on some results of calculation, so it's something that is in the code. So this gives to the citizens the awareness that something in terms of seismic safety could be classified similar to thermal efficiency in building, which is widely known across the world. Why not the same for seismic safety? So we did the same, but we encounter much more difficulties. Probably it's I mean, globally it seems that thermal efficiency is a more widely recognized problem. It can reach the citizens more easily. And while seismic safety seems, as I was saying, a small domain for expert, no? Seismologists or seismic engineers and so on. But I think we have to continually work on this. Personally, I've been also involved in several activities in school where with practical tests and practical activities and the engagement of the students, we try to learn them that it's possible to have safe buildings. We even built small models on educational shaking table tests, and from there they can understand the role of the different structural elements. So this, we think that in the future can provide some, I mean, messages, no, to the kids, and from the kids to the parents, to the society, in order to let's say, spread this idea and message that we have to demand safety constructions.
Thank you. Thank you, Kamal and Dr. Gareti. We are coming towards a close of this session. I will be requesting our chair, Dr. P.K. Mishra, for his closing remarks. But sir, if I may take the liberty to also pose a question along with your closing remarks, if you could share some insights. I know your remarks will be on insights. I had met you, sir, the first time 22 years ago. I had come to your office as a small group of young professionals at that time. You were heading the early efforts in the GSDMA, still on relief, early recovery. And we had come to say that we would really like to come and live in Patan and help rebuild a village or a cluster of villages. And I remember you had very graciously welcomed us. You had said that no matter how small or big, we are welcoming all offers of support to Gujarat this time. But you had also given a word of caution. You had said, and I clearly remember, you said, please don't create an oasis in the desert. At that time, it had taken me some time to fully grasp what you were saying in terms of equity, equality, when extending relief and recovery efforts into such a widespread area of impact, so many families that were impacted. And you later also wrote a book which the NIDM published. But then now, sir, you are in a very different position at a much higher level. You are seeing it from a different perspective. You are seeing multiple disasters. You are seeing multiple sectors, multiple states. You are even steering India's efforts to extend help outside our boundaries. How do you see things differently now, if you do? And if you had these insights at that time, is there anything you would have done differently in Gujarat? So this and your closing remarks, sir, please.
I think you have asked on so many questions. Because the first part, what you said, that when you came 22 years ago, two things I said. That of course you were welcome, even though we didn't know you or your group and very young people. We were fully, I think, open to use your ideas and knowledge. The second thing you said, that don't create invoices. I think building upon those two things, I would like to say that this post-earthquake 2001 recovery and the whole efforts in Gujarat, as I have also documented and mentioned also very frankly and honestly, it has been widely acclaimed as one of the most successful recovery program. It is also said that many new initiatives were taken and successfully also, for example, building back better or owner-driven reconstruction, which was though known, but I don't think it was ever adopted anywhere and in such scale, or retrofitting and so on. So many things were done. But I don't think whether I or anybody else or Gujarat can take full credit for all this. Because that time many ideas came from outside, not only from successes but also from failures. We analyzed very closely the Latur earthquake experience, which was in 1993, and it about 7-8 years ago. They had done a lot of work, but that time one question many people asked, how is it that Gujarat, Latur is so near neighboring state, could not learn from them and be fully prepared. Similarly, Kobe, certain ideas came, and all the international agencies, some of them are here, of course, UNDP and others. So if you ask me how and why it could be so successful, I will say three things. Firstly, of course, this openness to ideas, openness to however small it may be, that was there. So that's why anybody who came to help, somebody I remember came and just went straight to Kutch. He was just compiling data and putting on the website. Those days it was not very common. It didn't make much of an impact, but we encouraged him if somebody is doing something. So that was one thing that you said, anybody who came and any other idea that, and the other part is, that time we of course try to caution that many cases what happens, some of the NGOs or small organizations even do something in a village or some part of a village and show as a very, very successful thing which can't be replicated. So that was with that caution we try to idea, because ultimately we have to cover the whole state. So that was one reason, that openness to idea. The second one was of course political commitment. That was there from the beginning. I remember when the earthquake happened, that time Sri Keshubai Patel was the chief minister for about at least 8-9 months, 10 months. He was open to all ideas, spent hours. After that, Sri Narendra Modi became chief minister, who is our prime minister now. And of course he had a lot of drive and experience and hands-on approach. So that political commitment was there. The third thing was, of course, the governance aspect. GSDMA was created, though it was not the first in the whole country, because the first was the OSDMA, the Odisha State Disaster Management Authority, which was created probably a few months before because of the super cyclone of 1999. So that one organizational structure was created, and then of course all the freedom was given. In fact, that time one doesn't know whether it was right or wrong, or whether it was feasible or legally permissible, but all the power of the cabinet was given to the GSDMA. The governing body could take decisions which cabinet, and it did not go there. So that type of flexibility, and of course there was total transparency, like any benefit which was to be given, that was the names and all that were shown on the notice board of the panchayat. Though there were certain misuse and all that, at the lower level some action was taken and all that, but in fact I remember in the, after the tsunami in Indonesia, probably that time the ADB and OES, the Organization of Economic OECD, they organized a conference on how to prevent corruption in, that was the title, Corruption in Tsunami Relief, because it was to be large scale. It was held in Jakarta, and that time they invited GSDMA and I represented to present what were the measures adopted to make it fully transparent. So some of these things did help. Now your second, and many of course other aspects were there. And many of those things I have documented also. There was no intention to write a book on that. What I thought at some point of time, that many initiatives were there, many things which we had never known, because when the earthquake took place, though Gujarat is one of the most drought-prone states, and there is a relief manual and all that, cyclone come once in a while, though not as frequently in the eastern coast. Some experience was there, but nothing of this. So that I thought, why not to prepare something, so because many of those things were there in any case, some office files, some documents, some reports, some other things. Why not to bring together those in a more analytical frame? And just to, the idea was to prepare a discussion paper. Then that time the NIDM, when they came to know, I think that time probably somebody suggested, possibly Mr. Dr. Santosh Kumar, we would like to get it printed in the form of a book. That's how it came. Otherwise there were no. So that was the whole background. Now the second part of your question, which you said that how do I look at it now, whether it could have been done in a much better way, that question, answer is very clear that it could have been done much better had we had today's knowledge and ability. One part is that of course the many things have changed, not only in disaster management, but technology has changed. The prediction capacity or forecasting has improved. Many things we have now. Even giving the example of cyclone, and I always like to give this example, that those days the cyclone forecast was so, they were trying their best but not very accurate. Like when the Kutch, the Kandla cyclone, other cyclone, the forecast will be, landfall will be somewhere between Surat and Jakho. Jakho is in Kutch. So about 1,000 kilometers or even. So you do not know where the landfall will be, which district you would take precautionary measures, what is to be done. So coming from that, and of course the cyclone, normally the feeling was that when it crosses the coast and goes to the land, it dissipates gradually. There it did enter the land, but then again re-emerge in the Gulf of Kutch. So many things, but now it is, so all those things are there. And also the second part you said that don't create an oasis. So when you try to do something which will make an impact on a larger area, much more diversified, so the first answer is that we could have done much better. We have more capacity to forecast, more scientific knowledge, more of the technology. Communication has improved great deal, satellite geospatial communication. And also we didn't have something like the NDRF, because those days we didn't know at all that the search and rescue is a very specialized job. First time when, and we had a very strange policy at the Government of India level those days. We don't appeal for international assistance, but if somebody sends, we accept. So many things were there. And when some of the team search and rescue came from outside, then we learned ki it is. And then what we did, we thought ki we must develop, and we sent some 45 people for training in Germany, Netherlands and so on, and those were not senior level, but those who are at the operational level, some firemen, some police people and all that, to train them in search and rescue. Now, of course, at a later stage, NDMA has developed NDRF. So probably had NDRF been there, we could have done much better search and rescue. Had there been field hospital like we sent to Turkey recently, we could have done much better here. So all those things could have been done much better. Of course, time changes, things improve. We have many other areas also we do much better. But assuming that we didn't have any other technology, but the learning from experience, that itself helps. I remember those days for about next 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years. Whenever there is a conference like this, one theme used to be that we do not learn from experience, like Gujarat didn't learn from Latur, some other state, some other country and all that. So that was a common theme, and how to ensure that people learn from experience. But now I don't think we can say that so confidently, because we have learned many things from experience. So much has been done. So that is a very good thing, so things can be done much better. And finally, as you said, how do I look at it? I look at it now, that time it was a Gujarat perspective. Now when you look at the whole country, that becomes much more sometimes overwhelming also. Because in a large country, such diversified situations, so many areas, some are more developed, some are governance is not good, somewhere it is much better. So how do you have an approach, how do you have a strategy which will be relevant and effective in all areas, which obviously it is not one size fit for all, cannot be there. But how do you ensure that all those, so these are much more challenging time, and of course we had the experience of the COVID, which was unprecedented in scale and spread. And there we had many issues, and we also learned, because nobody knew about how COVID, the people had forgotten about that swine, that 1918 Spanish flu. That time no documentation had been, probably were there but not available. But as I mentioned in my introductory remark, the disaster management law was extremely relevant to have a common approach in the whole country, even ensure that lockdown, whenever it was necessary for a shorter time, could be enforced effectively. So we have done much, but we need to do much more, and particularly when we have to cover the large geography and many other countries. And those days we could never think of sending our search and rescue team to some other countries. Nepal we send, even Japan in a limited way, Turkey and all those. So this has been a very exciting thing, that to not only do something, to develop something, but to see how things have developed, how things have worked. Certain things may not have worked also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for those insights. There is such a rich knowledge base and experiences that you have, and we always continue to learn from those. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to a close of this panel discussion with this. Let me extend sincere thanks to our panelists. Amy, who's still there with us. Thank you so much, Amy-san. We hope to see you in person someday. Rajiv ji, Rita, Dr. Raditya Jati, Dr. Goreti, Kamal, thank you so much for contributing to this panel discussion. And Dr. P.K. Mishra, sir, it's been 22 years, but you still continue to be a teacher and you continue to inspire so many of us. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing this. Thank you all very much. I will be handing this back to Mrinalini ji. There is still a couple of interesting surprises ahead for you. Please stay with us. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Yes, we can move.
We experienced a range of emotions in last 30 minutes, from poignancy to hope, and insights that we gained from the panel discussion. While we conclude with a spiritual intonation by surrendering to the universe with an adieu song once again by Muralala Maravada troupe, by the time the stage is set, I would in the meanwhile request Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, Shri Rajendra Ratnuji, to make an announcement on the book that we just heard about, to the credit of Dr. Mishra. The title of the book is The Kutch Earthquake 2001, Recollections, Lessons and Insights. May I now request Mr. Ratnu?
Thank you, Mrinalini, for this opportunity. What an occasion when we are here seeing live the place, the Gujarat, which has been the happening place, which has witnessed one of the most deadliest of the earthquakes in the country. And we are having one of the greatest, even G20. And in the institute, which has been, we have one of the founders of the entire framework, legislative framework in the country of the disaster legislative as well as the institutional framework, the insights which were given by Dr. P.K. Mishra. He is also author of one of the very insightful book, The Kutch Earthquake 2001, Recollections, Lessons and Insights. So my institute, which I recently joined, National Institute of Disaster Management, had this honor and privilege to print this book, which he has authored in 2004 to print in 2012. And we have got very limited copies. We have, thanks to Dr. Kamal Kishore for reminding me to bring these books, and we have got the signs from the author on a place. So since we have very limited copies, we'll request you that those who are interested, and we will be able to extend it to the heads of the delegations of the countries, you may give your interest in this book to our organizers. We'll be reaching out to you to hand over these copies to you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
A sumptuous dinner is also waiting for you. While they still settle, I would now request Mr. Harshad Patel, Commissioner Relief, to deliver a vote of thanks.
Good evening to all esteemed delegates and participants. It gives me immense pleasure to express my heartfelt gratitude to all of the distinguished guests, subject matter experts, participants and organizers of this magnificent curtain raiser event. The event provided an excellent opportunity for global experts to share their wide experiences and learnings in the field of disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management practices. With immense pleasure, I extend my gratitude to Dr. Sri P.K. Mishra, sir, for gracing us with his presence and taking out time out of his busy schedule and sharing with us his immense knowledge, expertise and wisdom on the subject of disaster management. We are quite proud that India has now been emerged as the first responder in worldwide humanitarian aid and disaster relief HADR activities. I would also like to thank our esteemed panelists, moderator and all the performers from the Muralal group. I would like to thank the organizers and officers from NDMA, GSDMA, GIDM and SEEDS for their hard work in making this event a success. Last but not the least, my appreciation to Sri Kamal Kishore Member Secretary NDMA, Kamal Dayani Sir, CEO GSDMA, Sri PK Taneja, Director GIDM, and also Rajiv Ratnuji for their continuous guidance in organizing this curtain raiser event in a short time, and also the entire team for their tireless efforts in making this conference a grand success. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to all the delegates and participants for their active engagement and participation. Have a wonderful stay in Gujarat, and I also wish all the success to the first working group on DRR meeting starting from tomorrow. Thank you.
मुरालाला भाई आपका बहुत आभार. आप भोजन ग्रहण करके विदा लीजिएगा. Thank you once again Muralala bhai and troupe for their performance, and to all of you for being with us today and making this event successful. Ladies and gentlemen, you are now requested to join us at the exhibition arena followed by dinner. Thank you. Dhanyavad.